Hey guys, tonight we find ourselves transported back centuries, to a cloistered world of stone walls, flickering candlelight, and the hushed murmur of ancient chants. Imagine waking to the sound of a distant bell, its reverberations shaking you awake from your straw-stuffed mattress. The air is cold, biting even, and as you pull on your woolen tunic, you know a long, arduous day awaits you, assuming you don't accidentally commit some petty sin and face the abbot's wrath. You probably won't survive this, but let's pretend you do. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments below. I'm always curious to see where you're all tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The pre-dawn air clings to you as you make your way to the chapel. Your bare feet slap against the cold stone floor. The early morning chill seeps into your bones. Other monks, shadows themselves, shuffle past, their breath clouding the air like whispered secrets. You join them in the pews, the wooden benches hard and unforgiving beneath you. The first service, Matins, is about to begin. It's a long one, filled with chanting psalms and reading from scripture. You try to focus, but your mind wanders. Maybe to the warmth of the kitchen where Brother Thomas is already stoking the fire, or to the scriptorium where Brother Benedict is painstakingly illuminating the margins of a new manuscript. Historians still argue whether the strict adherence to this daily routine was a source of spiritual strength or a form of institutional control, but either way, you're stuck with it. Matins eventually ends, and a sliver of gray light begins to creep through the stained glass windows. It's time for lauds, another round of prayers praising the rising sun. You fight the urge to yawn. You wouldn't want to be accused of sloth, one of the 7 deadly sins. The abbot's eyes are always watching. After lauds, you finally get some sustenance, a meager breakfast of bread and perhaps a little cheese. Don't expect bacon, eggs and avocado on toast. Life in the monastery isn't exactly glamorous. Back to the chapel for prime, another service. Honestly, you're starting to think these guys are obsessed with prayer. In between services, you're assigned your duties for the day. Maybe you'll be working in the fields, tending to the vegetables that will feed the community. Or perhaps you'll be in the library, copying manuscripts by hand. The library is actually pretty sweet. Lots of knowledge, and it's fairly warm. If you're in the library, you dip your quill in ink and begin meticulously copying text onto parchment. Every letter must be perfect, every line straight. It's painstaking work, and your hand cramps after a few hours. The quill occasionally splatters, resulting in a ruined page, or you miscopy a word. That means hours of writing are wasted, and an annoying write-over with an eraser. The worst. Monks in the scriptorium were sometimes driven mad by this tedious work, reportedly scribbling curses and complaints in the margins of the books they copied. Historians know some of these monks suffered from lead poisoning, as it was in the ink. You keep your wits about you and try to stay focused. Accuracy is essential. A single error could change the meaning of an entire passage. As the saying goes, the devil is in the details. If you are sent to the fields, you trudge out into the muddy earth. The sun beats down on your back, and sweat stings your eyes. Weeds are relentless, and the crops are always susceptible to pests and disease. The work is backbreaking, and you long for the cool shade of the monastery walls. Despite the physical discomfort, there's a certain satisfaction in working the land, knowing that your efforts are providing sustenance for the community. It's a connection to the earth, a reminder of the simple rhythms of life. You try not to dwell on the fact that you are providing food for all your brothers who have to pray all day and stay indoors. One historical fact is that many monasteries were instrumental in preserving agricultural knowledge and developing new farming techniques. Back inside, you find yourself in the kitchen, peeling vegetables or stirring a huge pot of stew. Brother Thomas, the cook, is a gruff but kind man. He always has a story to tell, and his laughter is infectious. Monasteries were largely self-sufficient, producing everything they needed from their own lands. This meant that every monk had to contribute to the community's survival, from growing food to making clothing. Despite the hard work and meager rations, meals are an important time for communal gathering and sharing. As midday approaches, you gather in the chapel for sext, another service. At least it provides a brief respite from the labor, even if it does involve more chanting. After sext, you get a more substantial meal, perhaps some beans or lentils, along with bread and cheese. You eat in silence, listening to the reader reciting scripture from the pulpit. There's no talking during meals, thoughts must be focused on God. Some monasteries did permit a small beer or cider with lunch, but you wouldn't know, you always seem to get stuck with water. The afternoon brings more work. Depending on your skills and talents, you might be assigned to the infirmary, caring for the sick and elderly. Or you might be working in the workshop, repairing tools or crafting new items. You might even be involved in teaching novices, passing on your knowledge and skills to the next generation. Historians still argue whether monastic life was a haven for intellectual pursuits or a stifling environment that discouraged independent thought. Certainly, the emphasis on obedience and conformity could be seen as limiting, but monasteries were also centers of learning and scholarship. Afternoons bring nones, a mid-afternoon prayer service, and a chance to focus and reset your mind. The sun slowly begins its descent, casting long shadows across the monastery grounds. You feel a sense of exhaustion, but also a sense of accomplishment. You've made it through another day, another step on your spiritual journey. As evening falls, you gather in the chapel once again for Vespers, another prayer service. The light is dim, the air thick with incense. The chanting echoes through the stone arches, creating a sense of solemnity and reverence. Some monasteries are believed to have had secret passages and hidden chambers, used for everything from storing forbidden books to conducting clandestine meetings. Of course, you wouldn't know anything about that. After Vespers, you have a light supper, perhaps some soup or porridge. You eat in silence, reflecting on the day's events. Afterwards, there's a brief period of contemplation, time for personal prayer and reflection. You try to quiet your mind, to listen for the voice of God. It's not always easy. The distractions of the world still linger in your thoughts. Finally, as darkness descends, you gather in the chapel one last time for Compline, the final service of the day. The candles are extinguished, leaving the chapel in near darkness. The chanting is hushed, almost a whisper. Compline is a time for confessing your sins, seeking forgiveness, and entrusting yourself to God's protection. You pray for strength, for guidance, and for the grace to live a life worthy of your calling. As the last notes of Compline fade away, you quietly slip away to your cell. It's a small, Spartan space, furnished with only a bed, a table, and a stool. You strip off your woolen tunic and slip into bed, pulling the coarse blanket around you. The straw mattress is lumpy and uncomfortable, but you're too tired to care. You close your eyes, and finally you can rest. Before sleep you pray, asking for a fruitful and productive day tomorrow, when the bell rings for matins. Okay, settle in, friend. Let's talk Benedictines. Think of it like a very, very long, quiet retreat. Except it's your whole life. You're about to step into a world governed by a rule, not just any rule, the rule. The Benedictine Rule. And yeah, it's capitalized because, well, it's important. You're standing at the monastery gates, a little dusty from the road, probably wondering if you packed enough underwear. Don't worry, they'll provide, probably. The air smells faintly of beeswax, incense, and something vaguely earthy, probably vegetables from the garden you'll be intimately acquainted with soon. The first thing you notice is the silence. It's not an absence of sound, but a presence of stillness. Like a thick, comforting blanket muffling the world. You take a deep breath. Here we go. Now, this Benedict fellow, the guy behind all this? Saint Benedict of Nursia. Born around 480 AD, a time of, shall we say, robust political instability. Imagine ancient Rome crumbling around you, not exactly conducive to a quiet life of contemplation. Fun fact, legend has it he fled Rome, disillusioned with the decadence, and lived as a hermit in a cave. Dramatic, right? Total emo kid energy. Some historians still argue whether his hermitage was a genuine spiritual calling or a severe case of avoiding parental expectations, but either way, it got him away from the city. Anyway, he wasn't alone for long. Soon, like moths to a flickering candle, others sought him out. They wanted guidance, a structured life, maybe just a decent meal. Benedict, being the organized soul he was, started crafting his now famous rule. And it's not just about sitting around praying all day, although there is a fair bit of that. It's about community, balance, and a life lived in service to God, and occasionally, to scrubbing the latrines. You enter the monastery, and you're greeted by the abbot, the father figure of the whole operation. He's probably wearing simple robes, maybe a cross, and he'll definitely have a beard. A good beard is practically a prerequisite for the job. He welcomes you, asks about your journey, and gauges your sincerity. Because let's face it, joining a monastery isn't exactly a light decision. It's not like signing up for a gym membership you'll never use. You're making a commitment. A big one. The first step? The novitiate. This is basically your trial period. Think of it as monastic boot camp, except instead of push-ups, you learn to chant, and instead of yelling sergeants, you have patient, mostly, monks showing you the ropes. You'll be observed, questioned, and given a taste of the Benedictine life. You'll participate in the daily routines, learn about the rule, and generally try not to spill the holy water. And trust me, you will spill the holy water. It's inevitable. During the novitiate, you'll learn about the vows. These are the bedrock of Benedictine life: poverty, chastity, and obedience. Poverty means giving up personal possessions. No more hoarding that vintage action figure collection, sorry. Everything you own belongs to the community. Chastity, well, that one's pretty self-explanatory. No dating apps in the cloister. And obedience? That means following the abbot's instructions. No arguing, no backtalking, just good old-fashioned compliance. It's a big ask, no doubt, but it's all about surrendering your individual will to the will of God, as interpreted by, you guessed it, the abbot. Now let's talk about labor. The Benedictine motto is, Ora et labora, pray and work. They understood the importance of both. Work wasn't just a way to earn a living, it was a form of prayer, a way to sanctify the mundane. You might find yourself tending the gardens, copying manuscripts, back in the day, anyway, brewing beer, yes, really, or even acting as the monastery's librarian. In fact, Benedictine monks are often credited with preserving countless classical texts during the Dark Ages. They were the original bookworms, saving knowledge from being lost to time. You're probably thinking, brewing beer? That doesn't sound very monastic. But hey, monks gotta eat, and beer was often safer to drink than water. Plus, a little bit of the bubbly can make those long hours of chanting a bit more bearable. Some modern-day monasteries still brew beer, and it's pretty darn good. It's practically a spiritual experience in a glass. You trudge into the scriptorium, where the air is thick with the scent of parchment and ink. You're assigned a manuscript to copy, a painstakingly slow process. No copy-paste here, friend. Each letter, each word, must be carefully and accurately reproduced. One slip of the pen, and you might accidentally turn a theological treatise into a grocery list. It's tedious, yes, but also meditative. You enter a rhythm, a flow, losing yourself in the act of creation. It's a far cry from your usual doom scrolling on social media. The day is structured by the Divine Office, a series of prayer services held throughout the day and night. Matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, compline. Sounds exhausting, right? But it's the heartbeat of the monastery, the rhythm that governs your days. You rise before dawn for matins, stumble into the chapel half asleep, and join the other monks in chanting the psalms. Your voice, at first hesitant and unsure, slowly blends with the others, creating a harmonious chorus that fills the space. As the sun rises, painting the stained glass windows in vibrant hues, you feel a sense of connection, a sense of belonging. Now, about that food. The Benedictine Rule emphasizes moderation in all things, including eating. No lavish banquets here. Meals are simple, wholesome, and nourishing. Think hearty stews, bread, cheese, and whatever vegetables are in season. And of course, beer, if you're lucky. Meals are taken in silence, with one monk reading aloud from a religious text. It's not exactly dinner and a movie, but it does encourage mindful eating. You learn to savor each bite, to appreciate the simple blessings of food and fellowship. One quirky tidbit about Benedictine monasteries: they often have elaborate systems for signaling silence. Think of it as monastic Morse code. A certain number of coughs might mean pass the salt, while a subtle clearing of the throat could indicate the abbot is watching you. It's all very secretive and efficient. You spend years within the monastery walls. Years of prayer, work, and reflection. You've witnessed the changing of the seasons, the ebb and flow of monastic life. You've faced challenges, doubts, and moments of profound joy. You've learned to live in community, to forgive, and to be forgiven. You've probably developed a truly impressive tolerance for chanting. So you might be asking, what's the point of all this? What's the value of living a life so removed from the world? Well, the Benedictine Rule isn't just about escaping the world. It's about transforming it, one monk at a time. It's about creating a space where prayer, work, and community can flourish, a beacon of hope in a world often filled with darkness. And who knows, maybe after all those years of contemplation, you'll have some insightful thoughts on the nature of existence. But remember, it's not for everyone. Monastic life is a hard path, a demanding path, and definitely not a path for those who enjoy sleeping in until noon. Also, you have to really like robes. Really like robes. Ultimately, the Benedictine Rule is a testament to the enduring power of community, discipline, and faith. It's a reminder that even in the midst of chaos, it is possible to find peace, meaning, and purpose. And maybe, just maybe, it will inspire you to find a little more balance in your own life. Now, time for Compline. And maybe a small glass of that monastic brew. Don't tell the abbot I said that. Alright, settle in, settle in. Let's get comfy. Imagine, if you will, you are tired. Bone tired. You've been, well, let's just say you've been contemplating existence for the last, let's say 6 hours. And wow, that bell, is that still ringing? Yep, the incessant clang of the monastery bell is your new favorite alarm clock. Or more accurately, your new least favorite alarm clock. It's calling you to, well, more contemplation probably. Or if you're lucky, maybe it's time to host some turnips. You shuffle out of your tiny cell, think minimalist chic meets damp stone, and join the other brothers in the chilly pre-dawn air. The breath plumes out of your mouth like tiny, fleeting prayers. Don't worry, you'll warm up soon enough. There's always wood to chop, fields to till, and cheese to, well, contemplate. Everything here is very deliberate, purposeful. Unless you are in charge of refilling the ink pots. That's just tedious. You grab your well-worn hoe, feeling the familiar grip of the wood in your hand. It's comforting in a way. A direct connection to the earth, to the rhythm of the seasons. And thank goodness for the rhythm. At least something here makes sense. You head towards the monastery's vegetable garden, the hortus, a meticulously planned patchwork of greens and browns, all diligently fertilized with, shall we say, organic matter. The self-sufficiency ideal is strong here. This isn't just some spiritual retreat, it's an economic powerhouse, a self-contained unit designed to provide for all its own needs. Food, drink, clothing, even medicine, all produced within these walls. You are a monk of all trades. Master of, well, maybe not master of any, but certainly acquainted with all. Which, let's be honest, is probably a fair assessment of most people, right? Historians still argue whether this self-sufficiency was a conscious strategic choice, a pragmatic response to a chaotic world, or just a deeply ingrained cultural expectation. What's not up for debate, though, is its sheer impressive scope. You start hacking at the weeds stubbornly clinging to the root vegetables. The early morning air bites at your cheeks, but the physical labor begins to chase away the sleep. Each swing of the hoe is a small victory, a tiny act of creation in a world that often feels, well, beyond your control. Plus, you know, if you do a good job, maybe you will get a bigger portion of turnip soup tonight. A monk can dream, can he? And speaking of food, the monastery's kitchen is a marvel of medieval engineering, a vast stone space filled with the aromas of simmering herbs and freshly baked bread. The cellar is a cool, dark labyrinth where barrels of beer and wine slumber, patiently waiting to be awakened. The whole operation is overseen by the cellarer, a monk whose organizational skills would put most modern CEOs to shame. He's the gatekeeper of the monastery's bounty, the logistics manager of its internal economy. And you do not want to get on his bad side, especially if you enjoy a generous portion of abbey brewed ale. The monastery's fields stretch out beyond the walls, a tapestry of wheat, barley, and oats shimmering in the sun. The crops are carefully rotated, ensuring the soil remains fertile. They even do their own beekeeping. The buzzing hives are a little reminder that even in the most austere environments, life finds a way. It is fascinating, isn't it? Did you know that monasteries in medieval Europe were actually at the forefront of agricultural innovation? They experimented with new crops, developed better farming techniques, and generally made sure everyone had something to eat. They were basically the Silicon Valley of the Middle Ages, except instead of inventing apps, they invented better plows. You finish weeding your row of turnips and move on to the next task, tending the herb garden. This isn't just about flavor, it's about medicine. The monastery's infirmary is a place of healing, where monks tend to the sick and injured using a combination of prayer, herbal remedies, and what can charitably be called medieval medical techniques. It's not exactly cutting edge, but hey, at least they're trying. You carefully pluck sprigs of rosemary, thyme, and lavender, their fragrant oils releasing into the air. You imagine them later, infused in a soothing balm to heal cuts and bruises. You know, this might seem a bit tedious, but at least you are not the monk in charge of leeching. That's definitely an undesirable job. Apparently, some monks even wrote manuals on how to best breed leeches. What a time to be alive, right? This self-sustaining system wasn't just about survival. It was about spiritual discipline. Manual labor was seen as a form of prayer, a way to connect with God through the act of creation. Ora et labora, pray and work, was the monastic motto. And you know what? It's not a bad philosophy, even for the modern world. Although, personally, I'd prefer to pray after the work is done. My knees just can't handle all that kneeling. The monasteries also played a vital role in preserving knowledge. While the outside world descended into chaos, monks meticulously copied and illuminated ancient texts, preserving the wisdom of the past for future generations. Think of them as the original digital archivists, except instead of backing up data on a hard drive, they were copying manuscripts by hand, page by painstaking page. They didn't even have copy and paste. That's dedication. Monasteries were often the only places where literacy was valued and practiced. However, some sources claim some monks were secretly copying and preserving, shall we say, less pious works. Imagine stumbling upon that in the dark, dusty archives. The bell rings again, signaling the midday meal. You gratefully drop your hoe and join the other brothers, heading towards the refectory, the monastery's dining hall. The aroma of freshly baked bread and simmering stew fills the air. Your stomach rumbles in anticipation. The food is simple, but nourishing. And honestly, after a morning of manual labor, anything tastes delicious. You take your place at the long wooden table, and as the abbot intones a prayer, you close your eyes and give thanks for the bounty of the monastery. The simple routine, the purposeful work, the sense of community, it all adds up to a life that is, if nothing else, undeniably different. It is an escape to a land far away where the best form of currency is not money, but hard work and community engagement. Maybe that's something we can all learn from, right? Okay, settle in, friend. Let's talk cheese. I know, you're probably thinking, cheese? Really? That's what we're doing tonight. But trust me, this is going to be surprisingly curdivating. You're sitting there, maybe with a little insomnia creeping in. Perhaps you're even nibbling on a rogue cheddar slice yourself. Good, you're already halfway to enlightenment. Now, imagine you're not in your comfy pajamas, but scratchy wool robes. You're not scrolling through TikTok, but chanting Latin. And instead of a refrigerator stocked with takeout, your dietary options are limited. This, my friend, is the medieval monastery. And in the medieval monastery, cheese wasn't just a snack, it was practically a lifeline. You trudge into the refectory, the dining hall, after hours of prayer. The air hangs heavy with the smell of beeswax candles and, well, something vaguely fermented. It's not the most appetizing aroma, especially when you know what's on the menu again. A hunk of bread, some watery soup, and you guessed it, cheese. Every single day. Joy. But before you start fantasizing about a double cheeseburger, let's consider why cheese became such a monastic mainstay. One of the biggest reasons, and this is your mainstream history fact for the section, is that monasteries were often located in isolated, rural areas. They were, by design, self-sufficient. They needed to produce their own food, and dairy farming, especially cheese making, fit the bill perfectly. You've got your cows, your sheep, maybe even a few goats, happily munching away in the fields. Milk production is a relatively consistent thing. What happens in times of plenty? You turn that milk into something that lasts. Cheese, unlike fresh milk, could be preserved for months, even years, depending on the type. Hard cheeses like Parmesan, or something akin to it back then, could be aged and stored, providing a valuable source of protein and calories during the lean winter months. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of a protein bar, but smellier. Now for your quirky tidbit. Some monasteries became so renowned for their cheese-making skills that they actually paid their taxes in cheese. I'm not kidding. Imagine the tax collector showing up at the abbey, not with a ledger, but with a wagon specifically built for cheese wheels. Alright lads, fork it over. The king needs his cheddar. The mind boggles. The French village of Brie, even to this day, owes its name to the cheese of the same name, known since the 8th century. Apparently, Charlemagne even ordered some to be delivered regularly to Aachen. But why cheese and not, say, a massive stockpile of dried beans? Well, religious rules played a significant role. Many monastic orders, particularly the Benedictines, followed strict dietary guidelines. Meat was often prohibited, especially the flesh of four-legged animals. You could have fowl, sometimes, or fish on certain days. This left a bit of a protein gap. Cheese filled that gap nicely. It provided essential nutrients that would otherwise be missing from a predominantly vegetarian diet. It was a loophole, a divine cheesy loophole. Historians still argue whether the monastic love of cheese was purely practical or had deeper spiritual connotations. Some suggest that the process of cheese making itself, transforming something perishable into something enduring, symbolized the soul's journey towards enlightenment. Others maintain that it was simply the most convenient and cost-effective way to feed a large community of monks. Perhaps it was a little of both. What isn't up for debate is that the Benedictine monks did make, trade, and yes, even eat a lot of cheese. And you have to remember, the cheese they were eating wasn't exactly the artisanal, truffle-infused brie you might find at your local fancy cheese shop. It was probably a bit rustic. Some varieties were likely incredibly pungent, with rinds that could double as weapons. Some of the cheeses made by the monks were truly unique, utilizing local herbs and techniques that have now been lost to time. Maybe a monastic take on cottage cheese? Or a cream cheese infused with elderflower? Imagine the possibilities. The monks were the early pioneers of cheese innovation, driven by necessity and perhaps a touch of boredom. They were the original cheese influencers, long before Instagram existed. They set the stage for the great cheeses of the world. You might think that a diet of bread, soup, and cheese would be incredibly boring. And let's be honest, it probably was. But it also fostered a culture of simplicity and resourcefulness. The monks learned to appreciate the small things in life, even a particularly well-aged piece of pecorino. Ironic, when you consider that in the outside world, cheese was considered a luxury food. In the monastery, it was a necessity. Now, before you start feeling too sorry for these cheese-guzzling monks, remember that they also had access to something else: wine. Monasteries often had their own vineyards, and winemaking was another important aspect of monastic life. So, you have your bread, your cheese, and your wine. Not exactly a bad deal, right? Perhaps the monks had a more sophisticated palate than we're giving them credit for. Maybe that cheese wasn't so bad with a generous gulp of red. Now you're speaking my language. Here's a light joke for you. What did the cheese say to the monk? Have you gruyèred me yet? And now, another quirky tidbit. There are accounts of monks using cheese as a form of currency within the monastery. Need to borrow a quill? Pay up in Parmesan. Want someone to cover your shift in the scriptorium? That'll be 2 wheels of Fontina, please. It wasn't legal tender, but it probably lubricated some social exchanges. Historians still debate the precise methods used by medieval monks to produce their cheese. While some recipes have been preserved, many techniques were passed down orally, from one generation of monks to the next. This makes it difficult to reconstruct the exact process. But one thing is certain, they were masters of their craft, producing cheeses that were both nutritious and delicious, in their own special medieval way. And here's your mainstream history fact. Monasteries played a crucial role in preserving agricultural knowledge during the Dark Ages. While the rest of Europe was busy dealing with wars and invasions, monks were quietly experimenting with different farming techniques and preserving ancient recipes, including those for cheese making. And hey, if you ever find yourself feeling stressed or overwhelmed, just remember the medieval monks. They spent their days praying, working, and eating cheese. Maybe that's the secret to a long and peaceful life. Well, maybe not just cheese, but certainly not the worst life to live. Alright, here's another dad joke. Why did the monastery have a cheese naming contest? They wanted to find the most provolone entry. So, next time you're enjoying a slice of your favorite cheese, take a moment to think about the medieval monks. They may not have had Netflix or Wi-Fi, but they had cheese. And in their own way, they lived a pretty good life. And here's an open scholarly debate phrase. To what extent did the regular consumption of cheese contribute to the health and longevity of monastic communities? Some claim the protein and nutrients enhanced their health, while others point to potential downsides like high-fat content. And for your final quirky fact, I want you to imagine this. There's evidence to suggest that some monks would secretly hoard their favorite cheeses. Hidden stashes of aged cheddar tucked away in their cells. Forbidden camembert concealed beneath their robes. A monk sneaking a taste of his secret stash when he thinks no one is looking. Oh, the monastic mischief! It's hard to resist the siren call of a perfectly ripe brie, even if you've sworn an oath of poverty. Now, as you drift off to sleep, remember the humble origins of your favorite snack. From the isolated monasteries of the Middle Ages to your very own fridge, cheese has played a surprisingly important role in human history. So, thank you to the monks for bringing cheese to our plates. You're surrounded by the hushed quiet of an ancient stone building. The air is cool and damp, carrying the faint, tangy aroma of, well, cheese. Not just any cheese, mind you. We're talking about cheese forged in the crucible of history, nurtured by centuries of monastic dedication. You're probably thinking, monks? Making cheese? Weren't they supposed to be, like, praying and stuff? And you'd be right, of course. Prayer was definitely on the agenda. But so was sustenance. And, as it turns out, some pretty darn ingenious cheese making. Imagine the scene. It's the early Middle Ages. Europe is a patchwork quilt of warring kingdoms and general uncertainty. Travel is difficult, dangerous, and your average peasant probably doesn't know what tomorrow will bring, let alone what cheese he'll be nibbling on next Tuesday. Monasteries, on the other hand, are beacons of relative stability and order. They're not just places of worship, they're also centers of learning, agriculture, and crucially, food production. Monks, bound by vows of poverty and obedience, are tasked with providing for themselves and for the poor and needy. This isn't some artisanal, Instagram-worthy hobby, this is survival. So you, a hypothetical medieval monk, find yourself in charge of the monastery's dairy. You've got cows, sheep, maybe even a goat or two, depending on your region. You've got milk. Now what? Milk spoils quickly, especially before the advent of refrigeration. But cheese? Cheese is milk's more durable, arguably more delicious, cousin. It's a way to preserve precious nutrients, to feed your fellow monks through the long winter months, and maybe even to trade for other necessities. And let's be honest, A little cheese alongside your daily bread and ale probably makes those endless hours of chanting just a little more bearable. It's like the medieval version of a cheese and wine night, minus the Netflix binge and slightly improved robes. You begin the process, and it is a process. You heat the milk, add rennet, historically, often sourced from the stomach lining of calves, a charming detail, isn't it, which causes it to curdle. You cut the curds, drain the whey, and then the magic happens. Or rather, the science happens. You see, different monks in different regions experimented with different techniques, each tweaking the process to create their own unique cheeses. Some pressed the curds to remove more moisture, resulting in harder, longer-lasting cheeses. Others washed the rinds with brine or beer or even wine, encouraging the growth of specific molds and bacteria that imparted distinct flavors. And some just kept the recipes secret. It's said that certain monastic orders guarded their cheese-making techniques with the same fervor they guarded their sacred texts. Can you imagine the cloak and dagger stuff? Whispered formulas, clandestine cheese-tasting sessions. Brother Thomas, I believe I detect a hint of heresy in this Gouda. The Benedictine order, for example, was particularly renowned for its agricultural prowess. They drained swamps, cleared forests, and generally turned unproductive land into fertile farmland. And with more farmland came more livestock, and with more livestock came, you guessed it, more cheese. They were the OGs of sustainable farming, centuries before it became a trendy buzzword. Their influence spread throughout Europe, with Benedictine monasteries becoming centers of cheese-making innovation. In fact, some of the most famous cheeses in the world today, like Munster and Maroilles, trace their origins back to Benedictine monasteries. Which means that the next time you're indulging in a particularly pungent slice of cheese, you can thank a medieval monk. Or, just enjoy it. Your call. Historians still argue whether the monks were truly the first cheese makers in Europe. Evidence suggests that cheese existed long before the monastic orders rose to prominence. The Romans, for example, were enthusiastic cheesemongers, and archaeological digs have unearthed evidence of cheese-making dating back thousands of years. But what is undeniable is that the monks played a crucial role in refining and standardizing cheese-making techniques, preserving and transmitting knowledge, and ultimately shaping the cheese landscape of Europe. They elevated cheese-making from a simple act of preservation to a true art form. And speaking of art, let's not forget the spiritual dimension. For the monks, cheese-making wasn't just a job, it was a form of prayer. The meticulous, repetitive tasks, stirring the curds, draining the whey, aging the cheese, were seen as a way to connect with God. It's like a culinary form of meditation. Each wheel of cheese was a testament to their dedication, their patience, and their faith. You could even say that those cheeses had a certain je ne sais quoi. Something beyond the flavor, the texture, the aroma. Something almost divine. Of course, not all monastic cheeses were created equal. Some were undoubtedly better than others. And let's be honest, some were probably downright awful. Imagine accidentally introducing the wrong bacteria into a batch. You could end up with a cheese that smells like sweaty socks or tastes like, well, let's not go there. And then there's the challenge of consistency. Medieval cheesemaking was hardly an exact science. Variations in milk quality, temperature, and humidity could all affect the final product. It's a miracle they weren't all just eating a medieval version of cream cheese spread on stale bread. But even the occasional cheesy mishap couldn't dampen the monks' enthusiasm. They persevered, experimented, and learned from their mistakes. And over time, they perfected their craft, creating cheeses that were not only delicious but also a source of pride for their monasteries. Their reputation spread far and wide, attracting travelers and pilgrims who were eager to sample the monks' renowned creations. Some monasteries even became famous for a specific type of cheese, attracting customers from miles around. It was like the medieval equivalent of a Michelin-starred restaurant, except instead of a fancy-tasting menu, you got a hunk of cheese and a tankard of ale. And probably a sermon. It's important to remember that the monks weren't just making cheese for themselves. They were also providing for the poor and needy. Monasteries were often centers of charity, offering food and shelter to the vulnerable members of society. Cheese, being a relatively nutritious and long-lasting food, was a valuable asset in this endeavor. In a world where hunger was a constant threat, the monks' cheese helped to sustain countless lives. They were literally spreading the cheesy love. And I think we all need a little more cheesy love in our lives. So, the next time you're enjoying a particularly fine cheese, take a moment to appreciate the legacy of those medieval monks. They were the unsung heroes of the cheese world, the pioneers who transformed a simple act of preservation into a culinary art form. They were also kind of sneaky about keeping the recipes, a real historical intrigue. They proved that even the most humble task, when approached with dedication and faith, can have a profound impact. And who knows, maybe one day you'll even try your hand at cheese making yourself. Just don't blame me if your cheese ends up smelling like sweaty socks. That's on you. Right, settle in, buttercups. Let's embark on a journey, a lactose-laden odyssey, if you will, into the hallowed, and occasionally moldy, halls of monastic cheese making. You're probably imagining chanting monks in brown robes, and, well, you're not entirely wrong. But there's so much more to this cheesy tale than meets the eye or the palate. You trudge up a winding cobblestone path. The air, surprisingly, smells not of incense, but of something distinctly dairy. You can hear the distant clang of cowbells, a surprisingly cheerful soundtrack to this historical pursuit. You pass a small, hand-painted sign, Abbaye de Fromage. You smile. Yep, you're definitely in the right place. You enter the courtyard, and instantly you feel a sense of calm. Monasteries, you see, weren't just places of prayer. They were also hubs of innovation, particularly when it came to keeping bellies full. And believe me, those monks worked up an appetite. Manual labor, praying at odd hours, and probably a bit of secret snacking kept them quite busy. One of the earliest examples of monastic cheese production comes from the Middle Ages. Monks, possessing the land and the labor force themselves, had access to milk and, crucially, the time and space to experiment. You see, unlike peasants who were mostly busy keeping their heads above water and not dying of the plague, the monks had a little bit of a cushion. They weren't exactly rolling in dough, unless it was the kind they were baking, which, let's be honest, was also pretty impressive. They used their unique position to develop cheese-making techniques that would become cornerstones of regional specialties. And speaking of specialties, let's not forget the Benedictine order. They were a major force in spreading knowledge across Europe. The whole concept of standardization in cheese-making, that we can thank the monks. They meticulously documented their methods, passing down recipes and techniques from generation to generation. You could say they were the original cheese influencers, way before Instagram filters and aesthetically pleasing cheese boards. You're now inside the Abbey's cheese cellar. It's cool and damp, and the air is thick with the aroma of aging cheese, a symphony of funk, if you appreciate that sort of thing. Rows upon rows of wheels line the shelves, each at a different stage of maturation. You can almost hear them whispering cheesy secrets. This is where the magic happens. It's also where things get a little smelly. Just saying. Now let's zero in on a specific monastery, shall we? Consider the Pont-l'Évêque cheese, which originated, unsurprisingly, in the town of Pont-l'Évêque in Normandy, France. The cheese, a soft, washed-rind wonder, dates back to the 12th century, and monks in the area are widely credited with its creation. The story goes that the monks, being clever fellows, wanted to create a cheese that was both delicious and relatively easy to produce. Pont-l'Évêque fit the bill. The washing of the rind in brine encourages the growth of specific bacteria, contributing to its characteristic aroma and flavor. Don't let the smell scare you, the taste is worth it. Historians still argue whether the cheese was initially created for personal consumption or for trade. Maybe they just really liked cheese, and who can blame them? Perhaps it was a divine inspiration, a gift from above. Or maybe they were just trying to use up all that extra milk. The possibilities are endless. You reach out and gingerly touch a Pont-l'Évêque. It feels surprisingly soft and yielding, like a well-worn cushion. The rind is a pale orange, slightly sticky to the touch. You can almost taste the earthy, barnyard-y flavors. You restrain yourself from taking a bite. You're pretty sure they frown on that kind of behavior here. But the Benedictines weren't the only cheese wizards. Trappist monks, known for their strict vows of silence and self-sufficiency, were also prolific cheese makers. They were seriously dedicated to self-sufficiency. They grew their own crops, brewed their own beer, and, of course, crafted their own cheese. Think of them as the ultimate DIY enthusiasts, but with a spiritual twist. Chimay cheese, hailing from Belgium, is a prime example of Trappist cheese-making prowess. You might be more familiar with Chimay beer, but the cheese is just as noteworthy. It's a semi-hard cheese, often washed with Chimay beer during the aging process, which imparts a unique, slightly hoppy flavor. You can almost imagine the monks chuckling to themselves as they washed the cheese with their own brew. A match made in heaven, or at least, in a brewery. You now find yourself peering into another cellar. The air here is noticeably different. It smells not just of dairy, but of hops. Yep, you must be near the Chimay. You spot a monk carefully turning the wheels of cheese, a serene look on his face. You resist the urge to ask him how many beers it takes to wash a wheel of cheese. Probably best not to break the vow of silence, even indirectly. Now, let's hop over to Italy, the land of Amore and Pecorino. While not exclusively monastic, the production of Pecorino cheese, that sharp, salty sheep's milk cheese, has been closely linked to monastic traditions for centuries. Many monasteries in the Italian countryside owned flocks of sheep, providing them with a steady supply of milk. They developed various Pecorino recipes, each reflecting the unique terroir of their region. One of the more intriguing, and slightly less known, aspects of monastic cheese-making involves the use of herbs and other flavorings. You see, monks weren't just concerned with preserving milk. They were also interested in enhancing its flavor. They experimented with various herbs, spices, and even flours, creating cheeses that were as unique as the monks themselves. Some of these monastic recipes involve some truly bizarre ingredients. We're talking about things like crushed ants for extra protein, or infused with hallucinogenic herbs for, well, who knows what they were thinking. You're glad they kept meticulous records, if only to know what to stay away from. Imagine a cheese infused with rosemary and lavender, or one studded with peppercorns and chili flakes. These cheeses weren't just food, they were expressions of creativity, reflections of the monks' connection to nature. A culinary testament to their unwavering dedication. Historians still argue whether these flavored cheeses were intended for special occasions or for everyday consumption. Maybe they were trying to impress visiting dignitaries, or perhaps they were just bored with plain cheese. Maybe they were just really into foraging. Whatever the reason, their experiments resulted in a diverse range of flavors that continue to delight cheese lovers today. As you delve deeper, you discover some fascinating fringe tidbits. You hear whispers of secret cheese recipes passed down through generations, recipes so closely guarded that they are said to be written in code. You imagine monks poring over ancient texts, deciphering cryptic instructions for creating the ultimate cheese. It's like a cheesy Da Vinci Code, but with less Dan Brown and more rennet. You now imagine yourself in the scriptorium, a monk hunched over a parchment, meticulously copying a cheese recipe. You wonder what kind of pen they used. Probably not a ballpen. And you wonder if they ever made mistakes. Did they have cheese erasers back then? And of course, no exploration of monastic cheese would be complete without mentioning the role of cheese in monastic life. Cheese wasn't just a food source, it was also a form of currency, a symbol of hospitality, and even a tool for diplomacy. Monks used cheese to pay taxes, to reward loyal workers, and to negotiate treaties with neighboring communities. You know, the next time you're trying to get out of paying for something, try offering them a wheel of cheese. One rather unconventional use for cheese involved medieval warfare. It sounds silly, but true. Monks, in their desperation to protect their monasteries, have been known to hurl wheels of cheese at invading armies. The hard cheeses made for surprisingly effective projectiles. It wasn't exactly a sophisticated defense strategy, but it was certainly memorable. It's certainly a good one. You find yourself thinking about the enduring legacy of monastic cheese-making. These monks, in their quiet dedication, transformed simple ingredients into culinary masterpieces. They preserved knowledge, fostered innovation, and created a tradition that continues to thrive today. You take one last look at the rows of aging cheese, a sense of gratitude washing over you. You appreciate the time, effort, and yes, even the smell that goes into creating these wonderful cheeses. You make a mental note to buy some on your way out. You've earned it. And maybe a beer to go with it. After all, it's the monastic way. Okay, settle in. Adjust your pillows, fluff your blankets, maybe put on some lotion. We're about to dive deep into the surprisingly cheddar-wide world of cheese currency. I know, it sounds a little good to be true, right? But trust me, it's real. Cheese. As money. Think about that for a second, cheese. I mean, I like cheese as much as the next person. Brie drizzled with honey, sharp cheddar with a crisp apple. Oh, sorry, getting distracted. Focus. You're not here for my cheese cravings, you're here to learn about its fascinating financial history. So, let's get started. You trudge through the muddy fields, the pre-dawn chill biting at your cheeks. Your breath plumes out in front of you, ghostly white against the gray sky. You're headed to the monastery, and not for spiritual guidance, let's be clear. You're going to pay your tithe, in cheese. Specifically in carefully aged wheels of hard, pungent cheese that represent a portion of your farm's bounty. It's a far cry from swiping a credit card, isn't it? But back in the Middle Ages, this wasn't some artisanal hipster market. It was just Tuesday. Cheese, you see, was surprisingly valuable. It wasn't just some snack to nibble on while you binge-watched Netflix, although I'm sure someone, somewhere, did that too. It was a concentrated form of nutrition, easily preserved, well, relatively easily, and therefore, easily traded. Milk, on the other hand, spoils pretty fast. Even pasteurization, a relatively recent invention, didn't exist. So, transforming that milk into something durable like cheese made perfect sense. Historians still argue whether specific types of cheese were considered more valuable than others, but generally, hard cheeses like Parmesan, Pecorino Romano, and certain cheddars would have been prized for their longevity and ease of transport. Imagine trying to pay your taxes with a wheel of ripe camembert. Yeah, that's not going to end well. You approach the imposing stone gates of the monastery. The monks, surprisingly, are not surprised to see you lugging a massive wheel of cheese. They're probably thinking, oh, it's this guy again, always bringing the stinky stuff. They carefully inspect your offering, checking for quality and weight. They're looking for signs of mold, the bad kind, not the delicious kind on blue cheese, cracks, or any other imperfections that might devalue it. This cheese isn't just going to be eaten, after all. It's going to be stored, traded, and maybe even used to pay their debts. Talk about a cheese chain. Now, a mainstream historical fact for you. In medieval Europe, cheese was a crucial part of the agricultural economy. It provided essential nutrients to the population, particularly during the long winter months when other food sources were scarce. It was a staple food for everyone, from peasants to nobles. And that meant it was a valuable commodity. It was so valuable, in fact, that it was sometimes included in dowries. Can you imagine? And I promise to love, honor, and cherish you, and bequeath to you 3 exceptionally aged Goudas. Talk about a cheesy pickup line. I'm so sorry. But it wasn't just the monasteries that were hoarding cheese. Landowners, too, often accepted cheese as payment for rent. Instead of shelling out gold or silver, which, let's face it, most peasants didn't have, they would offer a portion of their cheese production. This system was particularly common in areas where dairy farming was a major industry, like the alpine regions of Switzerland and Italy. You can picture it now, a landlord sitting at his table, surrounded by stacks of cheese wheels, looking like a very lactose-tolerant Scrooge McDuck. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. In some regions, cheese was even used as a form of collateral. Need to borrow some money? Put up a wheel of Parmesan as security. It's like a cheesy pawn shop, only instead of gold watches and guitars, it's all about dairy products. And if you couldn't pay back your loan? Well, say goodbye to your prized pecorino. I imagine that repo men back then smelled amazing. You heave your cheese onto the scales, the monks scribbling furiously in their ledgers. You've paid your dues, at least for now. It's a surprisingly transactional experience, this act of religious obligation. But in a world where hard currency was scarce and unreliable, cheese offered a tangible and reliable alternative. It might not have been as shiny as gold, but it was a whole lot tastier. And arguably, much more useful. Beyond tithes and rent, cheese played a significant role in regional trade. Imagine traveling to a neighboring village to barter for goods. You've got a few extra wheels of your finest Gruyere? Perfect. You can trade it for wool, tools, or even livestock. It's a far cry from Amazon Prime, but it got the job done. And it probably smelled a lot better than a warehouse full of cardboard boxes. The use of cheese as currency wasn't limited to the medieval period either. In some parts of the world, it continued well into the modern era. In fact, there are even anecdotal reports of cheese being used as a form of informal currency in certain regions during times of economic hardship. Desperate times call for desperate and delicious measures. Now, here's another mainstream historical fact to chew on. Pun intended, the development of cheese-making techniques was essential for its widespread adoption as currency. Different regions developed unique methods for preserving and aging cheese, resulting in a variety of textures, flavors, and shelf lives. This diversity made cheese a versatile commodity, suitable for a wide range of transactions. You wouldn't want to pay for a year's worth of rent with a cheese that goes bad in a week, would you? And speaking of diverse cheeses, here's a quirky fact. Certain types of cheese were even considered medicinal. Some believed that certain cheeses could cure ailments, ranging from stomach problems to skin conditions. So, you could not only pay your doctor with cheese, but also expect him to prescribe you more cheese. Now that's what I call a healthcare system. Historians still argue whether the value of cheese currency was standardized or subject to regional fluctuations. Did a wheel of Parmesan in Italy have the same purchasing power as a wheel of cheddar in England? It's a complex question, and the answer likely varied depending on factors such as supply, demand, and local regulations. Think of it like exchange rates, but with more dairy and fewer spreadsheets. As you turn away from the monastery, the sun finally breaking through the clouds, you can't help but feel a strange sense of respect for cheese. It's more than just a food, it's a symbol of resilience, ingenuity, and the power of dairy. It's a reminder that even the simplest things can have a profound impact on our lives. So, the next time you're enjoying a cheese plate, take a moment to appreciate its rich history. Think about the peasants who toiled in the fields, the monks who carefully aged their wheels, and the landlords who counted their cheesy fortunes. Cheese is more than just a delicious treat, it's a piece of history, served one slice at a time. And you know what? That's pretty great. I'm so sorry. You're settling in, maybe pulling a blanket tighter around your shoulders, a mug of something warm steaming gently beside you. Perfect. Because tonight we're delving into a topic that, frankly, is far more intriguing than it has any right to be: cheese. Specifically, cheese and the church calendar. Yes, that church calendar. The one brimming with Lents, fast days, and feasts, all of which have, at various points, dictated our relationship with this magnificent, sometimes stinky, dairy product. Imagine, if you will, medieval Europe. The air is thick with the smell of wood smoke and unwashed bodies, a sensory symphony, really. Life revolves around the church bells, which dictate not just the time, but also what you're allowed to eat. And crucially, when you're not allowed to eat certain things. Like cheese. During Lent, the 40-day period leading up to Easter, the rules were strict. Meat was out, obviously. Eggs were verboten. And dairy? Forget about it. No creamy butter slathered on your rye bread. No luscious cheese melting on your, well, probably gruel. The idea, of course, was self-denial. A little suffering to commemorate Christ's sacrifice. You can practically hear the monks chanting solemnly, and maybe dreaming of brie. It was supposed to be a period of reflection and spiritual cleansing. But for many, it was just a long, cheeseless slog. You trudged through the weeks, your stomach grumbling, the image of a perfectly ripe camembert haunting your dreams. You might think, Okay, 40 days. I can handle that. But Lent was just the tip of the iceberg. There were also Ember Days, Rogation Days, and various other fast days scattered throughout the year. These were often tied to specific saints or agricultural cycles. The sheer number of days on which you were meant to abstain from meat and dairy could feel oppressive. Now, historians still argue whether the average medieval peasant actually adhered to all these rules all the time. I mean, did they really throw away that perfectly good piece of cheese just because a bell rang? Probably not. Human nature is human nature, even when you're wearing a tunic and praying to a saint you've never met. There are accounts of people attempting to trick the system. Like, they tried to classify certain animals as fish, so they could eat them during Lent. The beaver, for instance. Apparently, some people argued that because beavers lived in the water, they were technically fish. You can almost picture a particularly devout beaver, shaking his furry head in disapproval. And hey, let's be honest, you might also try a little sneaky cheese eating if you thought nobody was watching. Don't worry, your secret's safe with me. But on the other end of the spectrum, some monasteries were deeply committed to the Lenten dairy fast, and it was serious business. Now, here's a quirky little fact for you. Some monasteries actually buried their cheese during Lent. They would dig a hole, carefully place the cheese wheels inside, cover them up, and then wait. The idea was to keep the cheese from tempting them, but also, and perhaps more importantly, to let it age. Because, you see, when Easter finally rolled around, they'd dig up these incredibly potent, intensely flavored cheeses, the result of months of underground aging. Think of it as the ultimate act of delayed gratification. Talk about a flavorful resurrection. You can just imagine the monks, their faces alight with anticipation, unearthing these cheesy treasures like they were lost relics. Now, you might be thinking, all this deprivation, what about the feasts? Ah, the feasts. These were the flip side of the coin. Days of celebration, abundance, and you guessed it, lots of cheese. Easter, of course, was the biggest one. The end of Lent meant that the cheese floodgates were officially open. Cheesy tarts, cheesy breads, cheese served with everything. Think about it. After weeks of denial, the taste of creamy, rich cheese must have been absolutely divine. You can almost feel the joy, the sheer unadulterated happiness, as you finally sink your teeth into that long-awaited bite. Christmas was another major feast, with its own traditions and culinary customs. And while you might associate Christmas more with roast goose or plum pudding, cheese certainly played a role. Feasting days were designed to be days of excess, to display wealth and demonstrate generosity. Think of a giant cheese board overflowing with every imaginable variety: hard cheeses, soft cheeses, stinky cheeses, cheeses studded with fruit and nuts. The more cheese, the merrier. And the louder the post-cheese nap, too. But here's a historical fact that might surprise you. The impact of the church calendar on cheese wasn't just about what you couldn't eat. It also influenced how cheese was made. Certain types of cheese, for instance, became associated with specific feast days. Some monasteries, known for their cheese-making prowess, developed special recipes for Christmas or Easter. They were like the culinary equivalent of holiday carols, passed down through generations of monks, each cheese a little different, each telling its own cheesy story. One particular monastery in France became famous for its buttery, bloomy rind cheese that was only made at Christmas. It was said that the recipe had been revealed to a monk in a dream. You can almost see him, startled awake in the middle of the night, scribbling down the sacred instructions. Historians still argue whether this legend is true or simply a clever marketing ploy to boost sales. Either way, the cheese became a symbol of the season, a tangible representation of the joy and abundance of Christmas. The legacy of these traditions continues to this day. While many people no longer strictly adhere to the church calendar, the association between cheese and celebration persists. Think about it. When you're planning a party, what's one of the first things you think about? A cheese board, of course. It's a symbol of hospitality, a way to welcome your guests and share in the bounty. And beyond the religious aspects, the church calendar had a profound impact on the development of European agriculture and food culture. The need to preserve food for long periods, especially during Lent, led to innovations in cheese-making techniques. Hard cheeses, for example, like Parmesan and Cheddar, were developed specifically for their ability to age and last for months, even years. So, in a way, the very cheeses we enjoy today are a direct result of those long, cheeseless fasts. It's a funny thought, isn't it? That the best cheese is, in a way, born out of deprivation. So next time you're enjoying a particularly delicious cheese, take a moment to appreciate its history. Think about the monks who buried their cheese, the peasants who may or may not have followed the rules, and the cheese makers who dedicated their lives to crafting these edible masterpieces. And maybe, just maybe, whisper a little, "Thank you," to the church calendar. It's gotten a bad reputation, but it turns out, it played a pretty significant role in shaping the world of cheese as we know it. And that, my friend, is something worth savoring. Right, come with me. Let's, shuffles papers, explore the monastic cellars and storage needed to truly coax the best out of our cheesy friends. It's not just about slapping some curds into a bucket and hoping for the best, you know? This is where the real magic, or, more accurately, the real mold, happens. We're talking about the infrastructure, the environment, the very essence of aged cheese. And trust me, even though you might think cheese aging sounds about as exciting as watching paint dry, well, sometimes it is. But it's fascinating paint drying, okay? Imagine, if you will, centuries ago. You're not a YouTube host, but perhaps a Benedictine monk diligently trudging down a damp, stone staircase. The air grows cooler with each step, carrying the earthy scent of damp stone, mold, the good kind, mostly, and that ever-present, faintly pungent aroma of cheese. Lots and lots of cheese. This, my friend, is your domain. Your kingdom of curd. And if you mess it up, Brother Alaric is going to be very unhappy. You see, back in the day, monasteries were essentially the epicenters of cheese production. They had the land, the livestock, the manpower, and perhaps most importantly, the need. Monks, you understand, weren't exactly living high on the hog, or, perhaps more accurately, high on the cow. Their diets were simple, and cheese provided a crucial source of protein and fat. Plus, it stored well, which was essential before, refrigeration. We're talking about preserving food for long periods, sometimes even surviving sieges or famines. Cheese could be the difference between survival and, well, not surviving. And of course, you could barter it too. Cheese as currency. Cheddar, the coin of the realm. I crack myself up. Now, the cellars themselves weren't exactly glamorous. Think damp, dark, and generally a bit icky. The ideal cheese cellar would maintain a consistently cool temperature, somewhere between 50 and 60 degrees Fahrenheit, and a high humidity, around 80 to 90%. This combination is key to preventing the cheese from drying out too quickly and encouraging the growth of those beneficial molds and bacteria that contribute to flavor development. You certainly wouldn't want your prize-winning Gruyere to resemble a hockey puck. Ventilation was also vital. You need to allow some airflow to prevent the buildup of excessive ammonia, which is a byproduct of cheese aging, and to discourage the growth of undesirable molds. Imagine breathing in ammonia all day. Not conducive to prayer or cheese making, really. So, you'd often find small, strategically placed vents or windows, carefully positioned to allow fresh air to circulate without causing drastic temperature fluctuations. Now, let's talk about the aging surfaces themselves. Monks weren't exactly popping down to IKEA for some artisanal cheese shelves. They were resourceful, using whatever materials were available. Stone shelves were common, as they helped to maintain a cool temperature and provided a stable surface. Wood was also used, particularly oak or spruce, but it needed to be carefully maintained to prevent the growth of unwanted molds. Sometimes straw or even beds of nettles were used to cradle the cheeses, imparting subtle flavors and textures along the way. Nettles, you say? Yes, my friend, nettles. Apparently, the monks of Munster cheese fame, in Ireland, have been known to use the plant to prevent excessive moisture retention in their cheeses. Bet you won't find that in your cheese-making book. And speaking of quirky tidbits, did you know that some monks believe that the phases of the moon influenced cheese aging? They would carefully track the lunar cycle and adjust their cheese-making and aging practices accordingly. They thought cheeses made during a new moon would have a certain characteristic while those made during a full moon would have another. Science? Not exactly. But tradition? Absolutely. The cheeses themselves would be carefully monitored throughout the aging process. You, as the responsible cheese monk, would be tasked with regularly turning, washing, or brushing the cheeses to ensure even ripening and prevent the growth of unwanted molds. You'd develop an intimate understanding of each individual cheese, knowing its quirks, its needs, and its potential. You could probably tell just by looking at it if it was going to be a particularly good batch or not. That's some serious cheese commitment, right there. Now let's fast forward to the present day. You're no longer wearing a habit and chanting Gregorian chants. Instead, you're probably wearing a slightly stained apron and listening to indie music. But the principles of cheese aging remain remarkably similar. Modern cheese caves, and yes, some artisanal cheesemakers actually build caves, still strive to replicate the cool, humid, and well-ventilated environment of those ancient monastic cellars. Modern technology, of course, has made things a bit easier. We have temperature and humidity control systems, sophisticated ventilation, and even automated cheese-turning machines. No more aching backs from flipping hundreds of wheels of cheese by hand. But the underlying principles remain the same, maintaining the right environment to allow the natural processes of aging to unfold. However, the debate continues about the ideal conditions for cheese aging. Some cheesemakers swear by the traditional methods, using natural caves and minimal intervention. Others embrace modern technology, arguing that it allows for greater control and consistency. And still others experiment with new and innovative techniques, such as aging cheese in wine cellars or even underwater. Yes, underwater cheese aging is a thing. Don't ask? Historians still argue whether the monks fully understood the science behind cheese aging, or if they were simply relying on tradition and intuition. Did they know about the complex interactions between bacteria, enzymes, and molds that transform milk into the delicious, complex flavors we enjoy today? Probably not in the scientific way we understand it now, but they certainly knew what worked. And that, in the end, is all that really mattered. They developed a system of trial and error, refining their techniques over generations to produce some of the world's most renowned cheeses. And in doing so, they laid the foundation for the artisanal cheese movement we see today. They were basically the OGs of the cheese game, and you, with your slightly stained apron and indie music, are carrying on their legacy. So, next time you bite into a perfectly aged piece of cheese, take a moment to appreciate the centuries of tradition, the monastic cellars, and the sheer dedication that went into creating that delicious, moldy masterpiece. And maybe say a little prayer to Brother Alaric. Just in case. Alright, settle in. Let's get comfy. Imagine you're nestled amongst a pile of velvet cushions, the air thick with the scent of ripening apples and, naturally, a good, strong cheese. We're talking about the big boys today, those majestic, rotund creations that command respect, the cheese wheel. Not just any cheese wheel, mind you, but the cheese wheel. The archetype. The UR wheel. You're probably thinking, it's just cheese, right? Delicious, versatile cheese. Maybe with some crackers. And you wouldn't be wrong, but you'd be missing a trick. Because shapes, my friend, shapes matter. And the wheel? Oh, the wheel is loaded with symbolic baggage. More baggage, probably, than that suitcase you shoved under your bed 6 months ago with the half-eaten granola bar still inside. Don't worry, I won't tell anyone. So, let's begin. You gaze upon it, that perfect circle, that golden disc. The sun, right? Obvious, maybe, but stick with me. The sun, representing life, warmth, energy, the ceaseless cycle of day and night. Think about it, ancient civilizations, from the Egyptians to the Aztecs, worshipped the sun. They built temples, they offered sacrifices, hopefully no cheese sacrifices, all in honor of that big, fiery ball. Now, your cheese wheel probably isn't quite that important, but it does share that same fundamental form. It promises sustenance, enjoyment, a little bit of concentrated happiness. It's a tiny, edible sun. And of course, the wheel symbolizes wholeness. It's complete, unbroken. There's no beginning and no end, just a continuous, flowing, cheesiness. Think about wedding rings. They're circles. They represent eternal love, commitment that goes on and on and on, hopefully without curdling into bitterness. Your cheese wheel, in its own cheesy way, promises that same kind of completeness. It's a self-contained unit, a microcosm of flavor, a tiny, dairy-based universe. Now I know what you're thinking. Okay, son, wholeness, got it. But it's still just cheese. And you're right-ish. But what kind of cheese are we talking about? Is it a firm aged cheddar? A creamy, decadent brie? A stinky, aggressively aromatic Limburger? The type of cheese influences the symbolic meaning, too. A cheddar, for instance, might represent tradition, stability, a solid foundation. It's the cheese your grandparents ate, the cheese that fuels picnics, the cheese that grates beautifully onto mac and cheese. A brie, on the other hand, is all about indulgence, luxury, a little bit of playful decadence. It's the cheese you serve with champagne, the cheese that melts seductively on a warm baguette, the cheese that makes you feel just a little bit fancy. You feeling fancy yet? Then there's the practical side. The wheel's shape, conveniently, is really good for aging. The surface-to-volume ratio is ideal, allowing for even ripening and development of flavor. It's no coincidence that cheesemakers throughout history gravitated towards this form. It's efficient, it's functional, it's wheel-wide good. Sorry, couldn't resist. But you know what? It's also symbolic of the cycle of time. From the moment the milk is curdled to the point where it's perfectly ripe, the wheel is aging, transforming, becoming something new. And speaking of history, did you know that cheese has been around for thousands of years? We're talking about evidence of cheese making dating back to Neolithic times. That's before writing, before metal tools, before even, arguably, good fashion sense. People were making cheese in clay pots, probably without any real understanding of the science involved. It was, just a happy accident. A really, really delicious accident. Historians still argue about exactly where and when cheesemaking originated, but one thing is clear, it's an ancient and integral part of human culture. Which brings us to folklore. Cheese has often been associated with magic, with the supernatural. There are stories of cheese wheels being used in divination, of cheese being left as offerings to spirits, of cheese being believed to have healing properties. In some cultures, it was thought that witches could steal milk and transform it into cheese. And I'm sure there are also stories of people trying to steal cheese and transform it into a midnight snack. Quirky tidbit time, ever heard of cheese rolling? It's a thing. In Cooper's Hill, England, every year, people chase a wheel of double Gloucester cheese down a ridiculously steep hill. The first one to the bottom wins the cheese. It's dangerous, it's chaotic, it's utterly bonkers. It's a testament to our enduring fascination with cheese and our willingness to risk serious injury for its cheesy goodness. But what about the holes? Ah, yes, the holes. The eyes. The Swiss cheese polka dots. What do they represent? Well, from a scientific perspective, they're just a byproduct of the fermentation process, pockets of carbon dioxide trapped within the cheese. But symbolically, they could be seen as imperfections, as flaws in the otherwise perfect circle. Reminders that nothing is truly flawless, that even the most beautiful and delicious things have their little quirks and anomalies. Or maybe they're portals to another dimension. I'm not saying they are, but I'm not saying they are either. Okay, now let's get a little esoteric. The wheel, as a circle, can also be seen as a symbol of the self. The center of the wheel is the ego, the individual identity. The spokes represent the various aspects of our lives, our relationships, our work, our hobbies, our beliefs. A well-balanced wheel, with all spokes strong and evenly distributed, represents a well-balanced life. A wobbly wheel, with some spokes weak or missing, represents, a life that needs a little bit of adjustment. Maybe you need more cheese in your life. Just a thought. Now, speaking of symbols of the self, in some esoteric traditions, the wheel is associated with reincarnation, with the endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. The idea is that we are all constantly evolving, learning, and growing, just like a cheese wheel that is constantly ripening and changing. We are all part of a larger, interconnected whole, constantly moving forward on the wheel of life. Heavy stuff, I know. Maybe we should just stick to cheese. But consider this, the act of cutting a cheese wheel. It's destructive in a way. You're breaking the perfect circle, disrupting the wholeness. But it's also generative. You're creating new pieces, new opportunities for enjoyment. You're sharing the cheese with others, spreading the cheesy love. It's a microcosm of life itself, a constant interplay of creation and destruction, of giving and taking. Just like my latest diet. There's this fringe theory circulating that ancient pyramids are designed to replicate the optimal temperature and humidity conditions for cheese aging. Crazy, right? While largely dismissed by mainstream archaeology, it's a fun illustration of the reverence some have for the cheese-making process. The idea is that these structures weren't just tombs or temples, but giant cheese refrigerators, designed to preserve and protect the most precious foodstuff of the ancient world. I mean, it makes as much sense as some of the other theories I've heard. So, there you have it. The humble cheese wheel, a symbol of the sun, of wholeness, of tradition, of indulgence, of the cycle of time, of the self. A culinary delight, a cultural icon, a source of endless fascination. The next time you see a cheese wheel, take a moment to appreciate its multifaceted symbolism. And then, just eat it. Because it's delicious. And that's really the most important thing, isn't it? Good night. Well, not really. I mean, I still have a lot to say. So, buckle up. It's not over until the wheel sings, or something like that. Alright, settle in. Let's talk cheese. Yeah, cheese. You're probably thinking, okay, this is gonna be riveting. And honestly, you're right. But not in the way you think. We're not diving into cheddar versus Gouda. We're plunging into the surprisingly cheesy, pun intended, sue me, world of medieval manuscripts. Picture this, you're in a dimly lit scriptorium, the air thick with the scent of parchment, ink, and wait, is that cheese? You peer closer at a painstakingly illuminated page. There it is. Not a wheel, not a wedge, but a subtle little inclusion. A friar perhaps, tucking into a snack between copying verses, immortalized forever in the margins. Or maybe, something else entirely. You see, cheese wasn't just food in the Middle Ages. It was practically currency. It was payment for services, offerings to the church, even a status symbol. Think about it, no refrigeration. Cheese was a way to preserve milk's bounty, turning it into something that could last for months, even years. Different regions boasted different cheeses, each with its own unique flavor and texture. Imagine being a cheese connoisseur back then. You'd be the person at court. One of the most well-documented uses of cheese was as a form of tithe. Peasants would literally pay their taxes in cheese. Can you imagine walking into the IRS and handing over a giant block of aged Parmesan? They'd probably just look at you funny, unless maybe you also included some artisanal crackers. This is where the monasteries come in. They were huge landowners collecting these tithes. They also needed to feed all those monks. So, unsurprisingly, monasteries became hubs of cheese production and innovation. Monks were like the medieval equivalent of food scientists, experimenting with different recipes and aging techniques. They're also partially responsible for a variety of alcoholic drinks, but that's another story for another night. Now, why would cheese show up in manuscripts? Well, sometimes it's as simple as accidental inclusion. Maybe a hungry monk was nibbling on some cheese while working and a crumb fell onto the page. Or perhaps a particularly greasy hand left a cheesy smudge. Hey, accidents happen. After all, these manuscripts were being produced by hand, often in less than ideal conditions. You trudge in after a long day of, well, whatever monks did all day. Maybe prayed a lot. And transcribed a lot of text. You're tired, you're hungry, you're probably craving something a little more exciting than plain bread. You sneak a bite of cheese. Suddenly, disaster. A crumb. Right on the vellum. You try to brush it off, but it's too late. A tiny, cheesy fossil. But there's also a more symbolic possibility. Cheese, in its various forms, could represent different theological concepts. The transformation of milk into cheese could symbolize spiritual transformation. The act of renneting and pressing could be seen as analogous to the molding and shaping of the soul. Some scholars even suggest that certain cheeses might have been associated with specific saints or feast days. Historians still argue whether these were intentional symbolic inclusions or simply happy accidents, though. And that's where things get really interesting. Because you start looking at the art in these manuscripts differently. Those illustrations of peasants tending their flocks? Are they just depicting everyday life, or are they also subtly referencing the importance of cheese in the agrarian economy? Those depictions of meals? Is the presence or absence of cheese significant? Consider the Book of Kells, for example, that incredibly ornate illuminated manuscript from Ireland. It's filled with intricate designs and hidden symbols. Now, I'm not saying there's a giant wheel of cheddar hidden in the Book of Kells, although, wouldn't that be amazing? But it does make you wonder if there are other, less obvious, references to cheese lurking within its pages. Maybe a tiny depiction of a butter churn, or a stylized representation of a dairy cow. You see, it's all about perspective, isn't it? There's a particularly fun, if unsubstantiated, theory that some monks used cheese as a sort of primitive binding agent. Apparently, the casein in cheese can act as a weak adhesive. So, the idea is that maybe some resourceful, and possibly desperate, monks used cheese to repair damaged pages or to bind together sections of a manuscript. I mean, think about it, you're in the middle of nowhere, your supplies are running low, and you've got a whole cellar full of cheese. Necessity is the mother of invention, right? The jury is still out on that theory, but it's certainly an entertaining thought. Of course, not all cheese encounters in manuscripts are subtle. Sometimes you find downright bizarre illustrations. I'm talking about anthropomorphic cheeses engaging in various activities. Cheeses playing musical instruments. Cheeses fighting battles. Cheeses attending court. What does it mean? Honestly, who knows? Medieval humor could be pretty out there. It's entirely possible that these were just silly doodles, intended to amuse the monks and add a bit of levity to their long days of work. You can picture it, Brother Thomas, meticulously copying the Psalms, suddenly deciding to draw a little cheese warrior wielding a butter knife. Just because. One mainstream historical fact is that the Catholic Church actually regulated cheese consumption during Lent. Certain types of cheese were forbidden, considered too rich or decadent for the period of fasting. This likely influenced what types of cheeses were depicted in manuscripts, or perhaps even if cheese was depicted at all. Showing a forbidden cheese could have been a subtle act of rebellion, or a simple oversight, or even a test to see if anyone was paying attention. There's also the question of preservation. Medieval manuscripts were often stored in damp, drafty conditions. This means that any organic material, including cheese, would have been susceptible to mold and decay. So, if cheese was used as a binding agent or accidentally splattered onto a page, it's unlikely that it would survive intact for centuries. This makes it even harder to confirm or deny the various theories about cheese in manuscripts. It's like trying to find a ghost in a haunted house. You might sense its presence, but you can't quite put your finger on it. I think one of the most interesting aspects of all this is the way it connects us to the past. It reminds us that the people who created these manuscripts were just like us. They were human. They got hungry. They made mistakes. They had a sense of humor. And occasionally they left little cheesy reminders of their existence for us to discover centuries later. You might think you know your history, but when a random fact connects to something that seems modern, it's as though you've time traveled. Did you know the word salary comes from the Latin word salarium, which originally referred to the salt allowance given to Roman soldiers? Salt, like cheese, was incredibly valuable. These days, both are easily taken for granted. There are also cases of illuminations on scrolls depicting milkmaids holding a pail of milk. We can conclude, if we think about it, that the milk would likely have been churned into butter. It would then also likely have been curdled to make cheese. And that, my friend, could have been used to feed a family. It's a quiet moment in history you can just about taste. But the cheese-filled monasteries? Not away! Ha! Sorry. So, the next time you're looking at a medieval manuscript, take a closer look. Don't just focus on the grand narratives and the religious symbolism. Look for the little details, the hidden clues, the accidental inclusions. You might just find a cheesy surprise waiting for you. Alright, settle in, pull up a comfy chair, maybe grab yourself a little snack. Perhaps a nice, aged Gouda? Excellent choice. Today, we're not delving into the nitty-gritty of cheese making. Oh no. Today, we're gossiping. Specifically, we're dishing the dirt, or, well, the curd, on monks and their, shall we say, interesting relationship with cheese. You trudge along a dusty, sun-baked road in medieval France. The air smells faintly of manure and something vaguely sour. That's probably the local monastery. Monasteries, you see, were the original farm-to-table movement. They weren't just about praying and chanting, though they did plenty of that, trust me. They were also agricultural powerhouses. Think of them as the Whole Foods of the 12th century, only instead of overpriced avocados, they had cheese. Mountains of it. You imagine yourself sneaking into the cool, dimly lit cellars. The air is thick with the aroma of ripening cheese, a symphony of earthy, pungent, and yeasty notes. You run your hand along the rough-hewn stone walls, cool and damp. Rows upon rows of cheese wheels, each one a slightly different color, shape, and texture, stretch into the darkness. Monks, in their rough woolen robes, move silently through the cellars, tending to their precious charges. They are like dairy farming ninjas. Silent. Deadly. With cheese. Mainstream history tells us that monasteries played a crucial role in preserving and developing cheese-making techniques throughout the Middle Ages. Wars and invasions disrupted trade routes, making it difficult to acquire certain goods, including, you guessed it, cheese. Monasteries, being relatively self-sufficient and possessing a stable workforce, became centers of agricultural knowledge. They experimented with different types of milk, aging processes, and herbs to create unique cheeses. They were basically the cheese whisperers of their time. And let's be real, who wouldn't want to be a cheese whisperer? Imagine walking into a room, sensing the subtle nuances of a brie, knowing exactly when it's reached peak perfection. It's a superpower I crave. Now for a slightly quirkier tidbit. Some believe that the particular shape of certain cheeses, like the traditional monk's head cheese of Switzerland, Tête de Moine, was designed specifically to be shaved, not sliced. This supposedly prevented the monks from indulging in excessive gluttony. They couldn't just grab a big chunk and scarf it down, they had to carefully shave off thin, delicate rosettes. It's like portion control medieval style. Which, honestly, is pretty ingenious when you think about it. Although, I suspect a determined monk could still find a way to overindulge. Maybe by constructing an elaborate cheese-shaving machine? Or just hiring a team of very tiny, very dedicated cheese-shaving squirrels? You know, they probably used to tell the novices, "Go forth, and shave wisely." But this brings us to one of those open scholarly debates. Historians still argue whether the monks' devotion to cheese-making was purely altruistic, driven by a desire to preserve knowledge and provide for their communities, or if it was motivated by something else. Something like, say, a deep, abiding love for cheese. I mean, let's be honest, have you tried a really good aged Gruyere? It's practically divine. One thing is certain, though, monasteries often had very specific rules about food consumption. Some orders were vegetarian, others allowed meat only on special occasions. But almost all of them seemed to have a soft spot for cheese. You can almost hear the abbot saying, "Brothers, we must abstain from worldly pleasures, except for this magnificent camembert." For research purposes, of course. You wander further into the monastery, the air growing cooler and damper. You can hear the faint sound of chanting in the distance. It's a calming, meditative sound, perfectly complementing the rich aroma of the cheese cellars. You feel a sense of peace, a connection to something ancient and enduring. But then you notice something odd. A monk, scurrying down a corridor, clutching something beneath his robe. As he passes, you catch a glimpse of a wheel of cheese? He glances nervously over his shoulder, then disappears into a dark corner. Ah, the rebellious monk. Every monastery had one, right? The one who questioned the rules, who pushed the boundaries. The one who perhaps smuggled extra cheese into his cell for a late-night snack. We are all that monk, right? I bet he had a little stash of crackers too. Just for, emergencies. Now, this is where the anecdotes start to get a little unverified. I'm not saying they're not true. I'm just saying, you might want to take them with a grain of salt. Or maybe a nice, crusty piece of bread. There's the tale of the Benedictine monk who supposedly used his cheese-making skills to bribe a local duke. The duke was threatening to seize the monastery's land, but the monk, knowing the duke's insatiable love for a particular type of pungent blue cheese, offered him a lifetime supply in exchange for leaving them alone. The duke, of course, agreed. And the monastery was saved. All thanks to the power of stinky cheese. See kids, this is why you need to learn a skill. There's also the story of the Cistercian monks who accidentally created a new type of cheese when they left a batch of milk out too long. It turned sour and lumpy, but instead of throwing it away, they decided to experiment with it. They pressed it, aged it, and voila! A new cheese was born. It was probably just their version of cottage cheese, but I like to imagine it was something really exotic, like a cheese that tasted like unicorn tears. You can see the headlines now. Monks discover unicorn cheese. Is this proof of the divine? You continue your imaginary tour of the monastery, now thoroughly amused. You pass the scriptorium, where monks are hunched over desks, meticulously copying ancient texts. You pass the gardens, where herbs and vegetables are carefully cultivated. And then you arrive back at the cheese cellars. This time you notice something else. A small, almost hidden doorway, leading to what looks like a secret cheese-tasting room. You peek inside. It's dimly lit, with a long wooden table laden with cheeses of every shape, size, and color. Monks, their faces flushed with pleasure, are sampling the cheeses, their eyes closed in blissful concentration. One of them sees you and smiles. He beckons you to come in. You hesitate for a moment, then step inside. He hands you a small piece of cheese. It's creamy, tangy, and slightly sweet. You close your eyes and savor the flavor. It's the most delicious thing you've ever tasted. Welcome, the monk says with a twinkle in his eye, to the brotherhood of cheese. And for a moment, you understand. You understand the monk's devotion to cheese, their willingness to spend countless hours tending to their precious charges. It's not just about preserving knowledge or providing for the community. It's about something deeper, something more fundamental. It's about the simple pleasure of creating something beautiful and delicious. It's about the joy of sharing that creation with others. After all, who are we kidding? If I was in charge of a monastery, I'd probably dedicate a whole wing to artisanal cheese production. Maybe even start a cheese-themed theme park. Holy cow, Cheeseland. Anyone? But perhaps the most enduring legacy of the monks and their cheese is the reminder that even in the most austere and disciplined environments, there is always room for a little bit of indulgence. A little bit of pleasure. A little bit of cheese. Alright, my friends, that's probably more than enough cheese gossip for one day. I hope you enjoyed our little imaginary field trip. I think I'll have myself a little cheese board right after this. Okay, settle in, friend. Get comfy. Maybe grab a snack. Because we are about to embark on a cheese-fueled journey through time. Specifically, we're going to wander the hallowed halls, and let's be honest, probably kinda musty cellars, of monastic Europe, and explore the absolutely divine impact these secluded communities had on the cheeses we still enjoy today. You might think of monks and nuns as just quiet, contemplative types, chanting away the hours. And sure, there's that. But they were also surprisingly skilled cheesemakers, brewers, and generally crafty folks. Forget divine intervention, we're talking about dairy intervention. You trudge along a cobblestone path, the damp morning air clinging to you like a persistent salesman. The distant sound of Gregorian chant drifts from the abbey walls. You can almost smell it, the earth, the stone, and that faint, unmistakable aroma of aging cheese. Ah, yes. Here. It was more than devotion that kept these cloisters thriving. It was economics. The monasteries needed to sustain themselves, and what better way than through the miracle of transformed milk? They cultivated crops, brewed beer, and of course, made cheese. Lots and lots of cheese. Now, before you get all visions of squeaky clean, modern dairies, picture something different. Think stone cellars, wooden vats, and techniques passed down through generations, often relying on, well, let's just say, intuition, as much as science. It was a far cry from the pasteurized perfection we expect today. But hey, who are we to judge? They clearly knew what they were doing, because some of these cheeses are still around centuries later. One of the earliest, and arguably most famous, examples is Munster cheese. It is thought to have originated around the 7th century in the Munster Valley of Alsace, France, hence the name. You take a deep breath, imagining the sheer volume of cheese wheels slowly maturing in those dimly lit cellars. Can you smell it? Strong, pungent, earthy. Some love it, some hate it, but you can't deny its legacy. It's said that the monks of the time developed the recipe as a way to preserve milk and feed the local population. A delicious act of charity. Of course, cheesemaking wasn't always a solitary pursuit for these monks. While they dedicated themselves to prayer and study, they also had to manage their resources efficiently. And so, cheesemaking became an integral part of their monastic life. It provided sustenance, income, and even a way to interact with the outside world. Who knew that dairy farming could be such a pathway to enlightenment? You almost consider taking a vow of silence and joining the nearest abbey, almost. You wander a little further. The abbey's cheese-making prowess wasn't just a local secret. Some of these cheeses became so renowned that they were even used as currency. Payment for goods, taxes, you name it. Imagine walking into the local tavern and paying for your pint with a wedge of ripe, oozing cheese. It certainly beats swiping a credit card. Historians still argue whether this widespread use of cheese as currency significantly impacted the economies of medieval Europe. But it certainly paints a delicious picture, doesn't it? Now, let's not forget the nuns. While the monks often get all the credit, the sisters also played a vital role in the development of cheese. In fact, many convents became renowned for their unique cheese varieties, often using local ingredients and techniques passed down through generations of women. Take, for instance, the story of nun's cheese, a semi-hard cheese made in some European convents. According to some sources, the nuns were not permitted to eat meat, so cheese became a vital part of their diet, and a significant source of protein. And speaking of unique techniques, one fringe theory suggests that certain monastic orders even experimented with adding herbs and spices to their cheeses, believing that these additions could enhance their medicinal properties. Imagine a cheese infused with thyme and rosemary, not just for flavor, but for your health. It's a far cry from the processed cheeses you find in the supermarket today. You pause, imagining those dedicated nuns meticulously crafting their cheeses, whispering prayers and recipes in equal measure. It's a charming image, isn't it? It makes you wonder about all the forgotten varieties, the cheeses lost to time, their recipes locked away in ancient manuscripts, or simply forgotten with the passing of generations. You trudge on. The sun is finally beginning to peek through the clouds, casting a warm glow on the rolling hills surrounding the monastery. You decide to visit the abbey shop, hoping to sample some of the local cheeses. You enter, and immediately the air is thick with the familiar scent. Rows upon rows of cheese wheels line the shelves, each one bearing a unique label, a testament to the skill and dedication of the monastic cheesemakers. As you browse, you can't help but notice the sheer variety on offer. There are hard cheeses, soft cheeses, washed rind cheeses, blue cheeses, a veritable symphony of dairy delight. And each one, in its own way, is a legacy of the monastic tradition. Historians still debate the exact extent of monastic influence on modern cheesemaking, but one thing is clear: these secluded communities played a significant role in preserving and developing the art of cheese making. They refined techniques, experimented with new flavors, and shared their knowledge with the surrounding communities. You pick up a wedge of a particularly intriguing-looking cheese. It's called Trappist Roquefort, and it's a Belgian cheese made by Trappist monks. The Trappist monks were pretty much the rock stars of the medieval cheese world. The cheese is strong, complex, and utterly delicious. As you savor the flavor, you think about all the history and tradition packed into this one little wedge. It's a testament to the enduring legacy of monastic cheese making. It's like a taste of the past, carefully preserved and passed down through the centuries. One of the quirks of monastic cheese making that doesn't always get mentioned is how, sometimes, things went hilariously wrong. Imagine a batch of cheese accidentally contaminated with some wild yeast, resulting in an unexpected, and possibly, challenging flavor profile. Or maybe the monks forgot to turn the cheese for a few weeks, resulting in a rather unusual texture. You can almost hear the whispered apologies during prayer. But the point is, these mistakes sometimes led to happy accidents. As you wrap up your cheese-tasting adventure, you can't help but feel a sense of gratitude for these monastic cheese makers. They were more than just monks and nuns, they were culinary pioneers. They preserved ancient traditions, developed new techniques, and ultimately enriched the world with their delicious creations. The next time you bite into a piece of your favorite cheese, remember the legacy of the monastic cheese makers. Remember their dedication, their skill, and their unwavering commitment to the art of transforming milk into something truly extraordinary. And remember, sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places, like a monastery cellar, filled with aging cheese and the murmur of ancient prayers. One thing that is rarely mentioned is the strange competition that often developed between different monasteries and convents, each trying to outdo the other with their unique cheese creations. It's said that some orders even went to great lengths to protect their recipes, using secret ingredients and elaborate rituals to ensure their cheese remained superior. In fact, there was one documented case of cheese espionage where one monastery attempted to steal another's cheese recipe. Can you imagine? Secret agents of cheese? You smile as you leave the abbey shop, a bag full of delicious cheese in hand. You know you'll never look at cheese the same way again. It's no longer just a food, it's a piece of history, a testament to the enduring legacy of monastic Europe. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a date with a wedge of Trappist Roquefort and a quiet evening by the fire. And perhaps a little light Gregorian chant. Okay, lean in close, cheese lovers, because we're about to embark on a sensory and slightly sleepy journey to a world where ancient traditions meet modern cravings. We're talking monasteries, robes, and ricotta. Yes, you heard right. Monasteries. Still making cheese. In the 21st century. Who knew, right? Imagine it. You're trudging up a winding road, the air thick with the scent of pine and something else. Something vaguely lactic. Your ears pop as you gain altitude, and the stone walls of the abbey finally loom into view. It's quiet, serene, almost unnervingly so. You half expect a chorus of Gregorian chants to erupt from the very stones, but all you hear are the distant bleating of sheep. And maybe the muffled whir of a very industrial-sized cheese mixer. Because, let's face it, those chants aren't paying the heating bills. You approach the visitor's center, a surprisingly modern addition to the centuries-old structure. Inside, the air is cool and the aroma of aged cheese is intoxicating. You peruse the offerings: creamy brie, crumbly cheddar, pungent blue cheese. Each lovingly crafted by the hands of monks, or in some cases, nuns. Yeah, habits and halloumi, that's what we're dealing with here. You might be thinking, wait, monks? Cheese? What's the connection? Well, it's a long and deliciously complicated one. You see, back in the medieval period, think plagues, pointy shoes, and really bad hygiene, monasteries were often the only centers of learning and agriculture. They were self-sufficient communities, and that meant producing their own food. Cheese, with its relatively long shelf life and high nutritional value, was a staple. Plus, monks were famously known for their frugality. Waste not, want not, and all that jazz. Excess milk? Cheese. Problem solved. And this isn't just some quaint historical footnote. Monasteries have been innovating in the cheese game for centuries. Take, for example, Munster cheese. While you might associate it with France, some historians credit its origins to the monks of the Munster Valley in Ireland, all the way back in the 6th century. Historians still argue whether the name derives from the Irish valley or from the Latin word monasterium. It's a cheesy debate, to be sure. So, monasteries weren't just making cheese because they had to, they were perfecting it. They were experimenting with different techniques, different cultures, different types of milk. They were, in essence, the original artisanal cheese makers. And the tradition continues to this day. You decide to purchase a wedge of Trappist cheese, the name itself a testament to the monastic order that originated it. Trappist monks, known for their strict adherence to the rule of Saint Benedict, have been brewing beer and crafting cheese for centuries. It's a way for them to support themselves, to maintain their communities, and to give back to the world. Plus, let's be honest, who are we kidding? A little bit of profit never hurt anyone. Even monks. You unwrap the cheese later that evening, the earthy aroma filling the room. It's a small pleasure, a moment of quiet contemplation, and it makes you think about the hands that crafted this simple delicacy. You can almost taste the centuries of tradition, the quiet dedication, the subtle hint of goat. But here's the thing, the world of monastic cheese isn't all serenity and aged cheddar. There are some seriously quirky stories floating around out there. For example, did you know that some monasteries actually use the cheese-making process as a form of meditation? Seriously. Apparently, the repetitive motions, the careful attention to detail, the constant stirring, it all helps to quiet the mind and connect with the divine. Just try not to think about the divine when you're cleaning the cheese vats, trust me on that one. And speaking of divine, some believe that the unique flavor of monastic cheese comes not just from the quality of the milk or the skill of the cheese maker, but from the wait for it, the prayers that are said over the cheese. Yes, you read that right. Apparently, a little bit of holy water and a few well-placed Hail Marys can work wonders for the flavor profile. Okay, I'm kidding, mostly. But hey, if it works, right? I mean, it's not like we're going to knock a good marketing angle. Back in the monastery shop, you may also encounter some slightly more controversial offerings. We're talking cheese flavored with herbs that are said to have aphrodisiac properties. Or cheese that is aged in caves rumored to be haunted. Yeah, things get a little weird out there in the cheese world. But hey, a little bit of mystery never hurt anyone, right? As long as it doesn't curdle the cheese, that is. You might be asking yourself, with all this talk of tradition and spirituality, are these monastic cheeses actually any good? Well, the answer is a resounding yes. Many of them are truly exceptional. They're made with high-quality ingredients, crafted with meticulous care, and aged to perfection. And they often have a unique flavor profile that you just can't find anywhere else. But the real appeal of monastic cheese goes beyond just the taste. It's about the story behind the cheese. It's about the connection to a centuries-old tradition. It's about supporting communities that are dedicated to living a life of simplicity, prayer, and, of course, cheese. And that's what makes it so special. Every bite is a little taste of history, a little taste of faith, and a little taste of really good cheese. It's important to note, however, that not all monastic cheeses are created equal. There are some out there that are, let's just say, less than stellar. You might encounter a cheese that is overly salty, or too bland, or that tastes suspiciously like feet. Hey, it happens. Not every monk is a master cheesemaker. Just remember, even the most devout cheesemakers have their off days. Another thing to consider, labeling. With the growing popularity of artisanal cheese, there's been a bit of a, let's call it, creative interpretation of what constitutes monastic cheese. Some cheeses are labeled as such simply because they are made in a rural area near a monastery, even if the monks themselves have nothing to do with the production. Sneaky, right? So do your research before you buy. Look for cheeses that are actually produced by monastic communities, and support the real deal. So, next time you're looking for a cheese that is a little bit out of the ordinary, consider giving monastic cheese a try. You might just find your new favorite fromage. And who knows, you might even find yourself feeling a little bit more enlightened. Or, at the very least, really, really full. And remember, you are supporting a tradition that spans centuries. You're supporting communities dedicated to peace and contemplation. You are helping the brothers and sisters keep the lights on, and the cheese vats full. Okay, time for a little cheese history fun fact to digest. Did you know that during the Middle Ages, some monasteries used cheese as a form of currency? Yep, monks would use wheels of cheese to pay for everything from land to livestock to, well, I'm sure they had other uses. Makes sense when you think about it, right? It's durable, delicious, and surprisingly valuable. Historians still debate whether the monks actually preferred cheese over gold. I mean, would you prefer to lug around a heavy sack of gold or a delicious wheel of brie? But here's a quirky thought for you. Imagine if we still use cheese as currency today. You could pay your rent with a block of cheddar. You could buy a car with a mountain of mozzarella. You could probably get pretty creative. The possibilities are endless. And the world would smell delicious. Okay, that's the end of today's cheesy story. It's time to say goodnight. I hope you've enjoyed our little journey into the world of modern monastic cheeses. Sweet dreams, and may your cheese always be perfectly aged. Okay, settle in, friend. Let's get cozy. You're probably already in your pajamas, maybe a little lavender oil diffusing in the corner. Good. That's the vibe we're going for. You trudge up the creaky stairs, each step a familiar groan under your weight. You've had a long day, emails, meetings, that awkward encounter with your neighbor where you both pretended you didn't see the other's overflowing recycling bin. We've all been there. You peel back the covers, the cool cotton a welcome contrast to the day's lingering stress. You sink into the mattress, a silent, escaping your lips. Tonight, we're not chasing sleep. We're inviting it. Gently coaxing it. Like luring a shy cat with a piece of tuna. Don't actually put tuna in your bed, though. Trust me on this one. You reach for your water glass on the nightstand, take a small sip, and set it back down with a clink. That's it. No screens. No doom scrolling. We're disconnecting tonight. We're going on a little mental adventure instead. A little journey into the fascinating, often bizarre connections that bind our world together. And hopefully, along the way, we'll lull you into a deep and restful sleep. Think about it, you're lying in bed, comfortable and hopefully relaxed. But your bed, and the room around you, is filled with echoes of history, strange coincidences, and tiny, almost imperceptible, threads connecting you to people and places you've never even dreamed of. For example, your mattress. Chances are, it contains some form of polyurethane foam. Now, who do we thank for the joys of polyurethane? Well, that would be one Otto Bayer. No, not that Bayer, though the pharmaceutical giant does figure into the story later. This Bayer, a German chemist, stumbled upon the process of creating polyurethane back in 1937. While initially used for things like coatings and adhesives during World War II, fun fact, Germany was the first country to widely use synthetic rubber, largely due to wartime constraints. It eventually revolutionized furniture, bedding, and well, pretty much everything. Historians still argue whether the widespread adoption of synthetic materials after the war was a boon or a bane for society, weighing the convenience and affordability against the environmental cost. But one thing's for sure, you're currently reaping the benefits, or suffering the consequences, depending on your eco-consciousness, of Bayer's somewhat accidental discovery. You just might be on a memory foam mattress. And what about that nightstand beside you? Is it made of wood? Probably. Consider this. The humble tree has played a crucial role in human history. From building shelters and ships to fueling fires and providing writing surfaces, remember paper? Before, gestures vaguely at everything, trees have been essential to our survival and development. But here's the quirky bit. Did you know that trees communicate with each other? No, not like in a Disney movie. But through a complex network of fungi in the soil, known as the Wood Wide Web, trees can share nutrients and even send warning signals about approaching threats like pests or droughts. Isn't nature just the most impressive ecosystem? You close your eyes, picturing the vast, interconnected forest, the silent communication happening beneath your feet. It's a humbling thought, isn't it? To realize that even the seemingly inanimate objects around you are connected to a vast and intricate web of life. This might be why the expression, "can't see the forest for the trees," even became so popular. And what about the light filtering through your curtains? Where does that energy come from? Maybe it's solar power, maybe it's coal, maybe it's a little bit of everything. The electrical grid, that sprawling network that powers our modern lives, is a marvel of engineering, but also a source of constant debate. Think about Thomas Edison. We often credit him with inventing the light bulb, but that's not entirely accurate. He perfected it, yes, and commercialized it, but numerous inventors before him had already experimented with electric lighting. Humphrey Davy, for example, demonstrated the first electric arc lamp way back in the early 1800s. But Edison's genius lay in creating a practical and affordable incandescent bulb, and in building the infrastructure to support its widespread use. A true business mind and innovator. Here's the fringe tidbit: Nikola Tesla, Edison's rival, championed alternating current, AC, electricity, which is what we primarily use today. But Edison was a staunch advocate for direct current, DC. The War of the Currents, as it was known, was a fierce battle for technological and economic supremacy. Tesla, despite his brilliance, was often overlooked in his time. And what about that glass of water you sipped from? Water, the elixir of life. The very thing that makes our planet habitable. You probably take it for granted, but access to clean water is a privilege that billions of people around the world still lack. We are extremely fortunate to have access to these basic living staples. Now, here's a historical head-scratcher. Roman aqueducts were technological marvels, transporting vast quantities of water to cities across the empire. But some historians believe that lead poisoning from the aqueduct's lead pipes may have contributed to the decline of the Roman Empire. Think about that as you sip water from your tap. Hopefully, your pipes are lead-free. And here's the quirky bit: there are people who believe that water has memory, that it can retain information and energy from its surroundings, even after being filtered or diluted. This idea, known as water memory, is often associated with homeopathy and has been widely debunked by the scientific community. But the belief persists, fueled by anecdotal evidence and a desire to find deeper meaning in the everyday. See how seemingly random and common objects in your room connect us to history, scientific debates, and fringe ideas? You yawn, a deep, satisfying stretch that ripples through your body. Your eyelids feel heavy. Good. That's exactly what we want. Your thoughts drift to the blankets on your bed. Wool, cotton, maybe a synthetic blend. Each fiber tells a story. The wool of sheep grazing in distant fields, the cotton grown in sun-drenched plantations, the synthetic fibers created in bustling factories. Consider the cotton gin, invented by Eli Whitney in 1793. It revolutionized cotton production, making it far more efficient and profitable. But it also had a devastating consequence. It fueled the expansion of slavery in the American South, as the demand for cheap labor to pick and process cotton skyrocketed. A dark reminder that technological advancements can have unintended and often tragic consequences. The fringe tidbit here is the legend of the cursed Hope Diamond, a massive blue diamond that supposedly brings misfortune to its owners. It's been linked to royalty, socialites, and rather tenuously, to the cotton industry, as some speculate its origins might lie in the mines of Golconda, India, which were also a source of cotton for the global textile trade. Historians still argue whether the Hope Diamond's curse is merely a product of sensationalism and superstition, or if there's something more to the string of misfortunes that have befallen its owners. You shift slightly under the covers, finding a comfortable position. The room is quiet, save for the gentle hum of the refrigerator in the distance, and the soft rustle of the wind outside. You are in your sanctuary. You are in your haven. The rhythm of your breath slows, becoming deeper and more regular. Your muscles relax, releasing the tension of the day. You feel yourself drifting, floating on a sea of tranquility. You are safe. You are at peace. The world outside fades away, replaced by a gentle, soothing darkness. The connections, the stories, the debates, they all begin to blur, merging into a single, comforting hum. You are sinking deeper and deeper into slumber, letting go of all worries and anxieties. Sweet dreams. End of script. Sweet dreams. Wind down. And now, as the edges of your awareness soften, let's allow the pace to slow, the images to gently dissolve like watercolor paint on a damp canvas. Feel the weight of your body supported by the mattress, each muscle releasing its final hold on the day. Imagine the softest, warmest light enveloping you, a blanket of pure serenity. There is nothing to do, nowhere to be. Only the gentle rhythm of your breath, a steady, comforting tide washing over you. All the complexities, all the connections, all the little stories have served their purpose, nudging you closer to this tranquil space. Let go of the need to analyze, to understand, to hold on to anything at all. Simply surrender to the quiet, the stillness, the peaceful emptiness of the moment. Allow the sounds around you to fade into the background, becoming a distant, almost imperceptible murmur. You are safe, you are secure, you are loved. And as you drift further and further away, know that you are exactly where you need to be. Surrounded by comfort, enveloped in peace, ready to embrace the sweet embrace of sleep. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and let go. Let go. Sweet dreams.